Welcome back, Gadgeteers. So it's a really nice day out. I've got the laptop outside and I thought, you know what? There is a Linux story that I'd like to talk about. And I was going to make something like a top 5 reasons why Linux won't make it in enterprise settings, but I decided that this particular story was good enough that I wanted to stop and talk about it now. Just so you know, this is from Bryan Lunduke, and he does this thing every year, Linux Sucks. And it's usually given before an audience, and somebody videotapes it, and it ends up on the interwebs. So this year, of course, because of COVID virus, he couldn't do that, so he did a YouTube video called Linux Sucks in 2020, and it's about an hour or so long. I do recommend you go and watch it. What we're looking at here is just some of the key areas he covered on why Linux is so bad. I want to say that if you don't know who Bryan Lunduke is, he is very popular in the Linux community, and he's done quite a bit to help the Linux cause. And pretty much everything he does is Linux. He uses Linux, but he also writes for Linux Magazine, and he has a job that is Linux related. So he's really ensconced in the whole Linux environment, which is cool because he is, I would call him an authority with these issues where he talks about why Linux is so bad. And I'm going to read through parts of this Slashdot article, and let's look it over and we'll talk about what's going on. So first of all, it's gotten to the point where it's called a tradition, not a speech. So he does an annual Linux Sucks. I believe it was 2012, 13 when he did the first one, maybe even farther back, and it was great. I feel like once you see one, maybe every 2 or 3 years you need to see it again. So let's get right into it. The first thing he talks about is the fact that Linux actually is doing rather dismal this year, scooping up the bottom of the barrel at 1.6% of installed systems. And we're not talking about servers, of course. If we added in servers, that number would be higher. But 1.6 desktop computers basically are using Linux. And he says it's dismal, and it really is. But there's reasons for that. He says, if you look back at 2004, the year 2004, 16 years ago, that was the high point in interest in searching for the word Linux or Linux plus other things. 2004, 16 years ago. It was about half that. So about 2 years later, it had dropped to about half. Here in 2020, it is so low, not only does it not fill up the first bar of pixels there, it's like only 3 pixels in. That doesn't happen. That sort of decline does not happen unless the platform sucks. That's just the truth of the matter. That's how it goes, right? Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with him. I'm not quite at that point where I would say Linux sucks, okay? But it has many problems, just like Windows does or Mac, although I think we can safely say the Mac platform has probably the least amount of problems because it really is that walled garden concept, cathedral or the bazaar. So it is the cathedral, right? It's this triangle of development coming from one place versus the bazaar, which is just all kinds of people coming in and contributing code and being a part of these small clusters of developers that develop for an individual package. So why is it that Linux sucks? Well, here's one of his biggest gripes, and one I don't necessarily agree with. He says, I have a piece of software now and I want to run it in 5-10 years into the future. Why shouldn't I be able to? Part of the beauty of open source is that the source code is available, so it's easy to keep software alive, so software doesn't die when someone stops maintaining it. it might as well be closed source half the time, because you're not just going to be able to get it to run in any reasonable amount of time. This is where I definitely disagree with Bryan. The thing is, can you imagine how bloated the kernel would be and other packages if they had to include code for every possible iteration of software that's ever been released so that it'll work on every system ever? It would become bloated and slow, and I feel like he should know that, and I think he does. I think he just wants it to be pie in the sky kind of thing, and unfortunately it's not going to be. We just can't do it, right? Because the code would be way too bloated. He would like that, and he gives some examples. Oh, before I go on, I want to say 5 to 10 years, no, but 2 to 3 years, reasonable. So I should be able to take a software package that's 2 to 3 years old and install it on my current version of Linux, unless there's been a major code change, like when we went from 32-bit to 64-bit. In that case, probably not, because then the developers would have to release a 32-bit and a 64-bit. If you went to 64-bit and the last version, say, of Office, LibreOffice, was 32-bit and it's not, unfortunately, you would not be able to run that unless you ran it in a virtual machine. Something to think about. Look what he says here, though. This is probably one of the most interesting parts. Having expressed the ultimate hearsay, he breaks out some examples. Civilization Call to Power, Railroad Tycoon 2, and SimCity 3000, all games that were ported over to our beloved Linux platforms. He owned those 3 boxes, and after working very hard, he could only get Railroad Tycoon 2 to run after a lot of hard work. I feel his pain here, and this is why I just don't play games in Linux. And whenever anybody asks me, hey, should I go to Linux, I say, do you play a lot of games? And they usually say, well, I play 3 or 4. And I say, do you really want to be in a position where you can't play those games anymore? My suggestion, dual boot, or put Linux on a portable drive. Don't erase Windows, because it's just not worth it. I know Lutris is out there, and there's other ways to do it. There are Proton, Steam Play, that allegedly will play every game, but you really have to have a system that's crafted for that, and there's just no guarantee. Whereas with Windows, if you buy the game from Steam, it's probably going to work just fine. Okay, so he says, unless I want to specifically have a retro Linux PC with an old version of Linux that never got updated, no repository updates, no distro update, nothing, in order to run them, they're basically dead to me. I can't use them, is what it means. That is true. When we go back 10 years, we are getting into the retro PC environment, and I have a retro PC that can run Windows XP, Windows 7, and Windows 98. I have it set up for DOS, Windows 3.1, and Windows 98. I see what he's saying here, but there's a point where you simply can't expect the operating system to support these very old games. It just doesn't make any sense. I've shot a video before about the next issue we're going to talk about, and I'm going to put the card up here. Well, not the card. Anyway, yeah, I forget what it's called, but there should be a blip appearing up here right now that you can go watch that video. Somewhat controversial, but the fact is, and Bryan Lunduke is right, I'm not saying Linux is bad because there's committees of people involved, but it is. He's completely right. There are certain software packages where committees have taken control, and as I'm sure you can imagine, if you had to do anything in your life, if you had to go jump in your car and get a gallon of gas or whatever for your lawnmower, but you first had to consult with 15 people and get their vote, I think you can see what the problem is. The other problem is with a committee, you're dealing with different ideologies. So political, ideological issues that surface, and it becomes a political battle to get something put into the package that you guys are working on, like Rhythmbox or the kernel or whatever. And Lunduke says the best free and open source projects are fiefdoms ruled over by a single dictator. Those are the ones that you see the biggest advancement on. You see the best marketing work, you see the best design work, you see the best usability, the coolest features. You see just the most laser-focused vision, and he's right. Nobody likes dictators, but unfortunately, it works in open source development. It kind of mirrors that whole closed source development where we have somebody right at the top of the organization and slowly it pyramids out in a triangle until we have developers that are answering to the next level of developers who answer to managers and so forth. Yes, I understand that it's something that many people donate their time for, and it seems kind of silly that they should have to answer, but you don't want to cheapen a product or cause a product to be less effective because somebody doesn't like what a manager said. That's my big problem with, I hate to use the term, but the whole snowflake mentality. Certain ideological and political platforms think that you should be hired for what you are, not what you've done. So the obvious question is, if you've got a dictator, why? What have you done in the coding world that makes you believe you could do this job? And the person responds, it doesn't matter. I'm the perfect person for this job. It could be an issue of gender, many other issues. I don't even want to go through them all because I'm afraid that YouTube will demonetize this video, and we don't want that. There is an issue in several of the packages that are available out there where exactly that has happened, and they've become basically a committee structure that really is a problem. So with development, that becomes an issue. Lunduke does say, just remember, at least Linux backwards compatibility really sucks. So we've got that going for us. There is a limitation to the backward compatibility like we've talked, but there's also an expectancy that you should be able to run a software program for at least a little while, 6 months to a year. One of my problems when I do research for a problem I'm having with Linux is when you're doing research and somebody says, yeah, on Fedora 30, I had this problem, so I did this. I almost, and I won't say immediately, but very quickly dismiss it because I'm on Fedora 32, which is over a year old. I'm sorry, Fedora 30 is over a year old. Fedora 32 is brand new. There's no guarantee that this recommended fix, which may be 5 or 10 commands that you have to run in the CLI, are actually going to work, or, God forbid, disturb something and cause problems with your system. I would have this expectation that at least for a year, there's some type of support for a fix or a software package that you're running saying, I don't want to update it. I don't want to update my kernel, but I don't know if anybody else has experienced this. This is another example. You have kernel 4.5 installed, and you decide you don't want to go up to the newest kernel, version 5. Eventually, you are forced to do it because the changes in the kernel start to cause problems with some of the packages that you're running because the newer versions of the packages are expecting a newer kernel with certain source code in it. You kind of have to upgrade the kernel eventually. Now, if it was a server and it's only running certain packages like Apache or something like that, It's not as big of an issue, and you can freeze the kernel, and then when you want to do an update to the kernel, you can keep your old kernel, do the update, having done research first, then you can go ahead and update the kernel on a server. On workstations, we have so many more packages installed. And that is a problem because we kind of have to march forward, at least at some point. To run an older kernel on the Linux workstation for a year is a really long time, and I would not be surprised if you start seeing problems. So you run a package, you start having issues, it crashes, whatever, and you think, maybe I should update the kernel because I can always go back to the old one. So you update the kernel and the problems disappear. So what do you do now? Do you go back to the old kernel that was stable for other reasons, other software that you used, or do you just go ahead and do the upgrade? It's really a tough question in my opinion. Was there anything else on here? I love the comments here. A nice example that too many people that do not understand Unix are a part of the Linux community now and are making it worse, which is what we just talked about. Somebody who gets hired for what they are, not what they know. So much this. There are advantages and disadvantages to the Nix way, but the Unix way is lots of small, simple tools that can be combined together. I'm not going to get into the Unix versus Linux thing. That's a whole nother video. The bottom line, though, in my opinion, is Linux doesn't suck for me, but the real reason is I'm not doing any gaming. I tried to do some gaming. I had Witcher 2 and 3 set up. Witcher 2 was a Linux compatible game. It had a port to Linux. Witcher 3 did not. I did get Witcher 3 set up, but it was painful. Another example of why Linux sucks. Case in point, this laptop that I'm running has an NVIDIA card built in, and it has the Intel on-chip built-in graphics. Well, unlike a Windows system that will run the Intel graphics while you're in so-called 2D desktop and whatnot, and then when you go into a game it'll run 3D, sounds reasonable, you'll run the NVIDIA card. At least in Fedora. I'm not going to say Ubuntu and other versions of Linux, but unfortunately that is the case in Fedora Linux, and so I decided I did port over my Fedora Linux to use the NVIDIA card exclusively. So I had to download drivers, they had to be compiled, they were closed source, all of that. It did work fine. It even worked in 2D here, like on this desktop, but the battery would last about an hour, and I needed my battery I needed my battery more than I needed gameplay on the NVIDIA card. So let me look here and see what I got. So I got an hour, almost 2 hours remaining. I've been sitting outside for a while now. We've been shooting this video for a while. Way better on a workstation than less than an hour. And this workstation is no slouch. It's a Xeon processor, 6-core. It's got 32 gigs of RAM. It has two 1 terabyte SSDs. So, and it has a 4K screen, 15-inch. It has a lot going. Things that might drain the battery faster. So my point being, you can't just switch back and forth between the Intel onboard chip, graphics chip, which would save battery power, to NVIDIA when you want to play games. It's one or the other. And I opted for Intel because I need the battery. I need it to last longer. So there's lots of little problems like that. I want to tell you to make sure you go check out Bryan Lunduke's video. He talks about much more in the video than just a few issues that we've talked about here. I just wanted to give you my take on Linux. Are there other reasons that it sucks? Yeah. One of the things I've often found is how quirky software package interfaces are. LibreOffice, which is considered one of the better ones, to me is really quirky. They're all quirky. They have something funny about them. I think if you watched my video a couple days ago, maybe a week ago, I moved my laptop up here to Fedora 32. Well, I decided that I was going to shoot a video for you on the GNOME desktop, so I went to the GNOME desktop and I was doing different things and I got kind of busy, so I closed the laptop lid and walked away. I came back, opened the lid, typed in my password, and it said invalid password. So I tried to do it several times and it simply, I don't know what was happening. So I tried different things. I simply could not get it to log in. So I powered off the system, like hard powered it off, booted it back up and said, I'm going to stick with KDE Plasma because at least if I have a timeout and I need to go do something, I can get back into the system and put my password in. Kind of important. I need to be able to do that, and I don't want to have to power down my system the hard way and possibly break something. So I'm sure if I do an update, things will get better and the problem will go away, especially bugs like that. I do expect them to be reconciled sooner rather than later. The other thing, which is a good thing, that I like to say is, you've got a problem with Rhythmbox or whatever, wait 2 days, do an update. It'll probably be gone. I don't know about Rhythmbox so much, but Kdenlive and other software packages that get regular updates that you see frequently when you run your updates. That's the good news about Linux, that although yes, backwards compatibility is an issue, well, any regression errors in the code or any errors in the code that get caused by an update are usually very quickly remediated and taken care of with another update. It's just a matter of running the update again. I've had several software packages like GwenView that was the case. Most of my video camera settings were missing in GwenView, so I couldn't adjust or change the settings. I thought, well, this is a real problem. I'm not really going to be able to shoot a video using this camera. And I thought, I'll just wait till tomorrow. So I logged on tomorrow. I did an update and rebooted. The problem was fixed. That's an egregious problem. That's something where they're going to take note, especially if they get enough complaints. All right, I think I've covered all I want to cover. Go watch Lunduke's video. Tell me what you think. Are there any issues that you have that makes you think Linux sucks? I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Fast Gadgets.
This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/fastgadgets.